The planet Zoria 7 was shrouded in mist and mystery. No one dared to step on its surface for hundreds of years. Stories from old explorers spoke of enormous creatures that could crush entire ships with a swipe of their claws. The aliens who lived nearby called them the forbidden monsters. Everyone feared them. Entire fleets avoided the planet, scanning its skies only from far away. They whispered warnings to newcomers, "Do not go. The monsters will eat you." Kale, a human explorer, arrived on Zoria 7 in a small, sleek ship. Unlike the aliens with him, Kale did not tremble or hesitate. He had studied the reports and scanned the planet's surface. Nothing in the data suggested the monsters were mindless killers. They were simply large and unknown. Where others saw danger, Kale saw curiosity. As the ship descended through the heavy clouds, his alien companions clutched the railing, their eyes wide with fear. "We should turn back," one of them muttered. "The monsters will detect us. We are fools to land here." Kale smiled slightly. "We will be careful," he said calmly. His voice had no hint of fear, only confidence. He had faced hostile worlds before, but nothing quite like this. The tension on the ship was thick, but Kale's calm seemed to soothe the human's instincts. At least, his own instincts. The landing was rough. The ground shook under the ship's weight. Strange shapes moved through the fog, massive silhouettes that stretched higher than the trees. The aliens screamed and grabbed each other. Kale, however, leaned forward, eyes fixed on the largest figure moving at the edge of the clearing. Its skin was dark and rough, like stone, with sharp spines along its back. Its eyes glowed faintly red in the fog. "See," hissed one alien, pointing. "It knows we are here. It will attack." Kale shook his head. "It is curious, not hostile," he said. "Watch carefully." Slowly he stepped out of the ship, his boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. The fog swirled around him, and the sounds of the forest were strange and echoing. He moved with steady, careful steps, keeping his hands visible, showing no weapons. One of the creatures let out a low rumble, the vibration traveling through the ground like a warning drum. The aliens gasped and stepped back. Kale froze but stayed calm. The monster stopped moving, watching him. Its eyes were large, intelligent, and curious. It tilted its massive head slightly, as if trying to understand the small human standing before it. Kale remembered what his old mentor had once told him: "Fear is a choice. Respect is stronger than weapons." Slowly he crouched, lowering himself to show he meant no harm. The fog made it hard to see clearly, but Kale could make out the faint breathing of the creature, heavy and measured. He extended a hand, palm open. The aliens behind him gasped louder. "Do not," one hissed, but Kale ignored them. The monster shifted its weight, stepping closer. The ground shook with every movement, but it did not strike. Instead, it observed him, its glowing eyes unblinking. Kale stayed still, breathing slowly, letting the silence stretch. Hours could have passed and he would not have moved. Then something remarkable happened. The monster lowered its head slightly, as if allowing the human to come closer. Kale reached out slowly and touched the rough, stone-like skin. It felt surprisingly warm under his fingers. The alien observers stared in disbelief. "You touched it?" one whispered, voice trembling. Kale nodded, gently stroking the edge of the creature's spines. The monster rumbled softly, a sound almost like a purr. It did not attack. Instead, it seemed to relax. Kale looked back at the foggy clearing. He could see other monsters moving in the distance, their massive forms slowly approaching, curious about this tiny, fearless human. The aliens were frozen. They had come expecting death or chaos, but Kale had done the impossible. He had approached the monsters without fear. He had not used weapons or traps. He had simply reached out with patience and respect. Kale stood up slowly, keeping his eyes on the creature in front of him. He could feel its weight, its power, but there was no hostility. Only awareness. The air was heavy, misty, and tense, yet somehow calm. Kale smiled faintly. This was only the beginning. If he could understand them, perhaps he could show others that the monsters were not enemies but beings misunderstood. The aliens whispered among themselves, their fear mixing with awe. Kale turned back to them and said softly, "We can learn from them. They are not what everyone fears." He extended his hand once more toward the fog, toward the moving shadows of the other monsters. One of them hesitated, then slowly stepped forward, curious like the first. Kale's heart raced with excitement, not fear. This planet, once thought deadly, held mysteries, and perhaps friendships, that no one had imagined possible. And for the first time, Kale realized that sometimes the bravest thing a human could do was simple: reach out and touch what everyone else feared. The fog on Zoria 7 was thick, But Kale could see the shapes of the monsters more clearly now. They moved slowly through the trees, their massive forms barely making a sound despite their size. The aliens with him whispered constantly, panic in their voices. "We cannot do this," one said. "They are too dangerous. We will all die." Kale shook his head. "Watch them first. Do not rush. Fear clouds judgment." His calm voice seemed strange to the aliens who were used to reacting with weapons or alarms. Kale did not carry a weapon. He did not need one. He trusted his mind and his understanding more than guns or shields. One monster stepped forward, larger than the first, with spines running along its back that looked sharp enough to pierce a hull. Its glowing red eyes scanned the group, settling on Kale. The humans behind him froze. Kale took a slow step forward, careful not to make sudden movements. "Do not approach," an alien hissed, grabbing at Kale's arm. Kale gently removed the hand. "They will not attack if you show respect," he said. He crouched slightly, keeping his hands open and visible. The monster's eyes narrowed, then tilted as if curious. Kale took another step. The ground shook slightly under the monster's weight. He paused. Slowly, deliberately, he knelt, lowering himself closer to the massive creature. The alien observers gasped and whispered that he was crazy. But Kale did not flinch. He reached out his hand toward the monster's massive head. The creature shifted slightly but did not move away. Its glowing eyes studied him carefully. Kale could feel its intelligence, its awareness. This was no mindless beast. It was alive, thinking, and observing. When his hand touched the creature's rough skin, it made a low rumbling sound. Not a growl, not a warning, but something softer. Kale's fingers traced the edge of its spines carefully. The monster lowered its head a little, allowing him closer. Kale smiled faintly. This small act of trust was more powerful than any weapon. The aliens stared in disbelief. It let him touch it?" one whispered. Kale nodded. "Yes. Fear makes you blind. Calm makes you see." Encouraged by Kale's calm, other monsters began to approach. They moved carefully as if sensing that Kale was not a threat. Their massive claws pressed into the soft ground, leaving deep prints, but they did not strike. Kale remained kneeling, letting the first monster sniff and inspect his hand. Its rough skin was warm and its eyes blinked slowly. He could feel a pulse of curiosity, a silent question. "Who is this small creature that does not fear me?" Kale slowly stroked the side of its head. It rumbled again, a sound almost like approval. The aliens behind him were pale, frozen in place, unable to move or speak. Some took small steps back, unsure if they should leave or stay. Kale did not notice. His full attention was on the creature in front of him. After a moment, Kale whispered softly, almost to himself, "It's not evil. It's only cautious." He leaned closer and let his fingers trace the edge of one of its small horns. The creature did not flinch. Instead, it lowered its massive head further as if asking for more. Kale could see the intelligence in its eyes. He could see that it was learning just as he was learning. It was aware that he was different from the others. It did not feel fear from him, and because of that, it could be curious instead of aggressive. Other monsters started to gather nearby. One was enormous, with skin like stone and spines along its back that glittered faintly in the fog. It let out a low rumble, almost like a warning to the smaller creatures. But Kale remained calm. He stood slowly, hands still visible, and approached the giant carefully. The creature studied him, then lowered its massive head slightly. Kale reached out again, stroking the edge of its rough skin. The rumbling sound grew softer, more constant. Kale's heart raced, not with fear, but with excitement. He realized that he had done the impossible. He had made the monsters pause, think, and even trust him a little. The aliens whispered among themselves. How does he do that?" one asked. "We cannot even stand near them, and he touches them." Kale looked back at them. "Because I do not fear them," he said simply. "Humans can see beyond what others fear. We can choose respect over panic." For the first time, the monsters were not just shadows of terror in the mist. They were beings capable of thought and response. Kale could see it in their eyes, in their movements. They were curious, cautious, and aware. And Kale, small in comparison, was earning their trust one careful gesture at a time. The fog swirled around them, hiding the alien trees and the soft ground. The monsters circled, but none attacked. Kale continued to kneel, touching the head of the first monster, while the others observed quietly. Something remarkable was happening. Where centuries of fear had built walls, Kale was building bridges. And so, the first true contact began. Not with weapons, not with force, but with calm, patience, and a simple human hand reaching out to touch the monsters that everyone else feared. Kale spent hours on the foggy plains of Zoria 7, moving slowly among the monsters. He did not rush. Every gesture was deliberate. He lowered his hands, stayed calm, and let the creatures approach him on their own terms. The aliens watching from behind the trees were frozen with a mixture of fear and amazement. They had come expecting death, but Kale's patience was changing everything. The first monster, the one he had touched before, moved closer, rubbing its massive head against his shoulder gently. Kale laughed softly, a sound full of wonder. "You are curious just like me," he whispered. The monster rumbled, a sound almost like agreement. Kale's hand traced the ridges of its skin, careful not to hurt it. The aliens blinked. They had never seen anything like this. Kale noticed another creature in the distance. It was smaller but faster, with glowing eyes that flicked nervously between the humans and the others. Kale did not move toward it immediately. He crouched low, showing that he meant no harm. Slowly, he extended a hand toward the ground, letting the smaller monster come to him. It hesitated, then stepped forward, sniffing his hand. Kale remained still, breathing calmly, letting it decide its own actions. The other monsters began to gather, curious about the human who did not fear them. They circled around, large shapes moving silently, their eyes following Kale's movements. Some made low, warning rumbles, but Kale understood their language. Not words but feelings. He could sense tension, hesitation, and slowly, acceptance. One of the aliens whispered, "He is not afraid, but how can he do this?" Kale looked back without turning his head fully. "Fear is what makes them dangerous. Calmness turns danger into trust," he said softly. "They are not attacking because I do not make them afraid." He approached a massive creature with jagged spines along its back. It was enormous, larger than any of the others. Its eyes glowed faintly in the fog, but there was no aggression. Kale extended both hands slowly, letting the creature see he carried no weapons. The monster sniffed the air, then lowered its head slightly. Kale stroked the side of its face, feeling the rough skin under his fingers. It rumbled softly and nudged him gently, a sign of trust that astonished the alien observers. Hours passed. Kale moved among the monsters, touching them, speaking softly, and watching their reactions. The creatures began to respond to him in small ways. A tail would sweep gently across the ground when he approached. Eyes would blink and focus on him. Even the largest ones seemed to relax, lowering their heads, letting him come closer. The aliens whispered anxiously to each other. "They are listening to him, responding to him, but why?" one asked. Kale smiled faintly. "Because I treat them like they are alive. I'm not trying to control them. I am showing them respect." By the evening, the monsters were following him. Not aggressively but carefully, mirroring his movements. He could sense their growing curiosity and even a kind of loyalty. The aliens, still hiding behind trees and rocks, could not believe what they were seeing. Where they had expected death, they saw connection. Kale had earned the monsters' attention simply by being patient, calm, and fearless. One of the smaller creatures suddenly stepped closer, brushing its head against Kale's hand. He laughed softly. "Yes, you are safe. I will not harm you." The monster rumbled in response, almost like a wordless agreement. Kale could feel the bond forming. He understood that the monsters were learning to trust him, just as he was learning to read their behavior. A massive shadow loomed nearby, the largest monster of all. It had been watching from a distance, waiting, cautious. Kale approached slowly, his hands open, speaking softly in human tones that the aliens could not understand. The creature tilted its head, examining him. Kale stayed calm, steady, and gentle. After a long pause, the monster lowered its massive head and allowed Kale to touch it. The aliens gasped, frozen in disbelief. Kale smiled faintly, stroking the ridges along its back. "You are not dangerous, just misunderstood," he whispered. The monster rumbled again, a deep sound that shook the fog around them. Kale understood that it was responding not with fear or anger, but with acknowledgement. It was recognizing him as someone who meant no harm. As night fell, Kale sat among the monsters, the aliens hiding in fear nearby. The creatures curled around him, massive shadows forming a protective circle. He spoke softly, laughed gently, and moved his hands carefully over their heads and shoulders. The aliens could only watch, unsure how to react. Kale had not just survived, he had made the impossible happen. He had earned the trust of beings everyone else feared. Kale looked up at the misty sky, feeling a quiet satisfaction. He had learned their behaviors, understood their reactions, and gained their curiosity and respect. The monsters were not tools or enemies, they were alive, intelligent, and capable of connection. And Kale, small and human, had found a way to reach them where no one else could. By the end of the night, Kale knew one thing clearly: understanding and calm could achieve what fear and weapons never could. The monsters, once terrifying and forbidden, had become something new, a bridge between humans and creatures no one else dared to touch. Kale smiled softly, stroking the head of the first monster again. Tomorrow he would learn even more. The fog over Zoria 7 was heavier than usual that morning. Strange winds whipped through the alien trees, bending them like grass. Kale had been exploring with the monsters, learning their patterns and movements. The aliens with him shivered in fear, constantly glancing at the shadows. Kale, however, stayed calm. He had learned to read the monsters' behavior and knew they were not dangerous, unless provoked by panic. Suddenly, a deep rumble shook the ground. Kale stopped and looked up. The sky darkened as clouds swirled violently, and the wind carried a sharp, eerie howl. A massive storm was approaching, faster and stronger than anything he had seen. The fog thickened and the temperature dropped. Kale's instincts told him this was dangerous, not just for him but for the monsters and the aliens too. "Storm. We must leave," one of the aliens yelled, panicking. "It will kill us all." Kale shook his head. "No. We cannot run blindly. Follow me and stay calm." His voice was steady. The aliens hesitated, unsure if staying calm was even possible. Kale moved toward a natural clearing where the monsters had gathered earlier. He knew it was the safest place nearby. The monsters seemed to sense the danger. Their massive bodies shifted nervously, low rumbles vibrating through the ground. Kale spoke softly, kneeling in the mud and holding out his hand. One of the smaller creatures came closer, brushing against him as if asking for guidance. Kale patted its head. "We will stay safe. Trust me." The storm hit suddenly. Fierce winds tore through the clearing, carrying sharp debris and knocking over trees. The aliens screamed and clung to each other, frozen in terror. Lightning struck nearby, sending splinters of wood flying. Kale moved quickly, guiding the monsters toward a natural hollow in the rocks. He stayed calm, keeping his movements deliberate and slow so that neither the creatures nor the aliens panicked further. One of the monsters hesitated near the edge of the clearing. Its massive claws pressed into the wet soil, but it looked at Kale, waiting. Kale stepped closer, gently stroking its spiny back. "Come. Follow me. We are safe together." The monster rumbled, then moved, its enormous body carefully following Kale into the hollow. The aliens, seeing this, began to follow as well, though fear still gripped them. They were amazed at how Kale could command the monster's trust without a word or weapon. Slowly, one by one, the huge creatures and the humans reached the shelter of the rock hollow. Kale's calmness had allowed them to move as one, avoiding panic that could have caused chaos. The storm raged on. Rain pelted down in thick sheets, and thunder shook the planet's surface. Kale knelt beside one of the smaller monsters, patting its head. "You're safe. We are together." The monster rumbled softly, leaning into his hand. It was a sign of trust, even in the middle of danger. Suddenly, a tree, torn loose by the wind, began to fall toward one of the aliens. Kale reacted instantly. He shouted a warning and the monsters moved too. One massive creature used its claw to push the tree away, preventing a disaster. The aliens stared in disbelief. Kale's calm had not only saved them but had also inspired the monsters to act to protect them. As the storm raged, Kale guided the group through the rocky shelter, moving carefully so that no one was left behind. The monsters stayed close to him, following his movements as if he were part of their own pack. He spoke softly to them, encouraging them and giving reassurance. The aliens could only watch, realizing that humans had a unique ability to connect, to communicate, and to lead in ways no one else could. Hours passed. Slowly the storm began to weaken. The clouds parted slightly and the wind died down. Kale stood and looked at the monsters. They had all stayed close, responding to his calm and guidance. The aliens, still trembling, finally spoke. We thought we would die," one said. But he led them, and they followed him. Kale nodded. "They are not mindless. They are alive, aware, and capable of understanding. We do not need fear to survive. We need trust, patience, and courage." He walked among the monsters, stroking the heads of the largest ones, who rumbled softly in acknowledgement. The aliens began to see what Kale already knew. Humans could do things others could not. They could face fear without panic, and they could earn the trust of creatures everyone else had feared for centuries. In the middle of the storm, Kale had not just survived, he had saved lives, alien and monster alike. He had shown that courage and empathy were more powerful than weapons or fear. By the time the storm passed, the clearing was soaked and messy, but everyone was safe. The monsters, once feared, now seemed calm and even protective. Kale smiled, looking around at the aliens and the creatures he had guided through danger. He knew this was more than survival. This was a lesson. Humans were not like any other species. They could turn fear into trust and monsters into allies. As the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, Kale rubbed the head of the largest monster gently. It leaned into his touch. The aliens stared in awe. Kale whispered softly, "See? There is nothing to fear when you understand." For the first time, the forbidden monsters were no longer just terrifying legends. They were friends. The morning after the storm, Zoria 7 looked different. The fog had lifted slightly, and sunlight filtered through the tall alien trees, casting strange shadows on the wet ground. The monsters, once terrifying and mysterious, moved calmly around Kale. They no longer glared or growled. Instead, they followed him, watched him, and even brushed against him gently as he walked. The aliens, still wary, watched from a distance. They had spent decades fearing these creatures, believing them to be unstoppable killers. Yet here they were, seeing humans interact with the monsters without fear or weapons. Their minds struggled to understand what they were witnessing. Kale knelt beside the largest monster, rubbing its head softly. It rumbled a low, contented sound, leaning into his touch. "See," Kale said quietly to the observing aliens. "They are not dangerous. They are alive and they can understand. We just have to show them respect." The aliens whispered among themselves, their voices shaky. "But how is this possible?" one asked. "We've studied these monsters for centuries. They are supposed to destroy anyone who approaches." Kale smiled faintly. "Humans are different. We do not only fight or flee. We observe. We learn. We adapt. That is why they trust me and why you will start to see them differently if you watch closely." Slowly, Kale guided the monsters toward the aliens. He stayed calm, speaking softly and moving gently, allowing the creatures to approach on their own terms. One of the smaller monsters brushed past an alien cautiously, sniffing and then stepping back. Another extended a massive claw, not in attack but in curiosity, letting the alien touch it. Gasps of amazement rippled through the group. Kale encouraged each movement, showing the aliens how to remain calm and how to interact without fear. It was careful work. One wrong gesture could have triggered panic, but Kale remained patient, reminding himself and the others that respect and calm were stronger than force. The aliens began to imitate him. Slowly, hesitantly, they reached out to touch the creatures. The monsters responded with curiosity, nudging their heads or brushing their spines gently against the humans' hands. The impossible had happened. Beings feared for centuries were now allies, at least for the moment, thanks to a human who had dared to be brave and patient. Kale stood back and observed. The monsters circled him, following his movements, but without aggression. The aliens began to understand something profound. Humans were not only brave, they could connect with creatures in ways no alien technology or weapon could achieve. They could turn fear into understanding, aggression into trust. One of the aliens stepped forward cautiously, speaking to Kale. You are teaching us. This changes everything we thought we knew." Kale nodded. "It does. Fear blinds you. Curiosity and respect open doors. These creatures are not evil. They are alive, aware, and capable of forming bonds. If you approach them the right way, they respond. That is the difference humans make." The monsters rumbled around them as if agreeing with Kale. Some curled gently around the humans and aliens, forming a protective circle. The largest monster lowered its head, letting Kale rub it slowly. The alien observers could hardly believe it. Centuries of fear and legend were being rewritten before their eyes. Kale smiled. "See? Nothing is impossible if you remain calm and show respect." They were never enemies. They were only misunderstood. And humans are capable of understanding what others fear. The aliens finally began to relax. They tentatively stroked the monsters, guided by Kale's calm example. Slowly they saw what he had been showing them all along. Courage was not about weapons or force. Courage was patience, empathy, and the willingness to understand. The day passed quietly. Kale moved among the monsters, talking softly and touching their heads. The aliens followed, learning from his example. The creatures no longer seemed intimidating. They were alive, intelligent, and capable of connection. By evening, Kale stood in the middle of the clearing, surrounded by the monsters and the watching aliens. The sun was setting, casting golden light over the scene. The monsters leaned gently against him, rubbing their heads or brushing their spines, calm and content. The aliens looked on with awe. Kale spoke softly, almost to himself. "Humans are different. We see beyond fear. We build trust where others see only danger. That is who we are. The aliens nodded slowly, understanding dawning in their minds. They had spent centuries avoiding Zoria 7, fearing the monsters and spreading stories of horror. Now they saw the truth. Humans could turn fear into friendship, danger into understanding, and monsters into allies. As night fell, the monsters settled around the clearing, calm and watchful. Kale rubbed the head of the largest one, smiling faintly. The aliens stepped closer, their fear replaced by curiosity and respect. For the first time, the forbidden monsters were no longer just legends to be feared. They were living, breathing proof that humans were extraordinary, brave, wise, and capable of understanding what no other species could. Kale looked up at the stars shining above Zoria 7. He felt a quiet pride. The monsters were no longer forbidden. They were friends. The aliens had learned something new, and the humans had shown what made them special: the courage to face the unknown, the patience to build trust, and the understanding to turn fear into friendship. And on that strange, foggy planet, surrounded by beings everyone else had feared, Kale knew humans had left a mark no one would forget.